on the late 15th century painted rood screens at Suffield, Corston and Gatesley in Norfolk, among other images of saints, is a figure dressed in the garb of a priest. In all three images, he holds in his hand a boot, and popping out of the top of the boot is the head of a little demon. Now at Gately, he's a rather sweet-looking demon with tiny little horns. As Suffield, the demon is rather more dramatic, with black wings unfurled and with red eyes. Corston and Gately, the figure is dressed in a red, fur-trimmed priest's gown, with a black hat on his head, while at Suffield he wears a priest's gown, his head bare, with his clerical tonsure showing. The figure of the priest appears at first sight as though he is about to pat the demon on the head, but he has his fingers in the attitude of blessing, which indicates that he is using the power of God given to him in his priestly office to exorcise a demon. The Gately screen has the figure neatly labelled as Master John Schorne. John Schorne was an English parish priest at the turn of the 14th century who became a popular figure of devotion in late medieval England, though he never formally attained sainthood by the standards of the late medieval Western Church. His cult is a rather frustrating one to understand. We have the images on these three screens, considerable evidence of the popularity of his cult in two locations, but there is no written hagiography of his life to draw on, so we know very little of substance about him or even the reason for his saintly reputation. What we know, we must piece together from scanty records.
Thank you for all your support. If you enjoy my YouTube channel, don't forget that you can support my work further and help others see my content by liking, subscribing and sharing my videos.
Master John Schorne seems to have been an ordinary parish cleric in medieval Buckinghamshire, and the hard facts are these. In 1289 he is listed as the rector of Monk's Risborough in Buckinghamshire. He was then a subdeacon and not a priest, from which we might infer that he was under the canonical age to be ordained a deacon, which was 23, or a priest 24. He had been ordained subdeacon to the title of Monk's Risborough Church, which means he was given the living and then had to be ordained in order to be instituted to it. And from that we might conclude that he was either well connected, wealthy, well educated, or all three. In most circumstances he is known as Master John Schorne, which suggests that he had a university education, though no record of that seems to remain. Anyway, in 1290 he becomes rector of the sleepy village of North Marston, just down the road from Monk's Risborough, and he remains there for the next 23 years, dying in 1313, probably in his late 40s. A copy of his will survives in a Tudor commonplace book of the 1520s in the British Library. In it, Schorne asks to be buried in the chancel of North Marston Church, next to the high altar and a tomb he has already prepared for himself. Now, preparing tombs in your lifetime was not that uncommon in the Middle Ages, and that's all that can be factually ascertained about him. Other people have drawn conjectural conclusions about his origins, suggesting he might have been a monk. Lipscomb, in his really rather dodgy and anecdotal history of Buckinghamshire, made the claim that he was a Benedictine monk of Christ Church in Canterbury and that he came from Schorne in Kent. There is no evidence to prove these assertions whatsoever, and it was quite unusual for medieval monastics to become parish priests. So that's who he was from an evidential basis. What about his reputation for holiness? What on earth is he doing on those Norfolk rood screens blessing a boot with the devil popping out of it? The devil containing boot seemingly refers to a miracle he performed in which he is said to have conjured the devil into a boot, though we have no evidence of the circumstances of that event. Now at North Marston, his parish, there is a chalybeate well that has in the past been associated with him. The local legend circulating in the 18th century was that John Schorne had struck the ground with his staff and that this spring this well had appeared, generic saintly behaviour in medieval England. By the 19th century this well is known as the town well and was the main water supply for the village, never freezing and never drying up. Even now, a lot of water comes out of it. Michael Wood, writing in his Dialogues of Creatures Moralised in 1555, and the Protestant hagiographer John Fox, writing in his The Fantasy of Idolatry in 1563, both record that people before the Reformation went to this well in North Marston for a cure from the ague, from malarial fever. In the 18th century, the antiquary Brown Willis tells us that, by a tradition then circulating in the village, the well had formerly had an inscription on its wall describing the images we see on the rood screens and linking the well directly to Schorne. John Schorne, gentleman born, conjured the devil into a boot. John Schorne, gentleman born, conjured the devil into a boot. So 3 things can be ascertained by all of this. That people came to North Marston to ask for John Schorne's aid at this well for the cure for the ague, that Schorne may have been from a wealthy gentry background, that he was a gentleman born, and that he performed a miracle, conjuring the devil into a boot. A miracle that was so renowned that it became part of his standard iconography. Now, it's often said by modern writers that John Schorne was invoked by medieval people against the gout, and the devil in the boot doesn't refer to a particular event, but rather to the pain of the gout. There is absolutely no evidence at all that people went to John's grave or to this well seeking a cure for the gout. Exorcism was very much part and parcel of the late medieval religious experience and was an essential element of a medieval parish priest's ministry. It is just as likely that people understood that John Schorne performed a very difficult exorcism on a demon than the devil in the boot was gout. Anyway, something about John Schorne, either in life or in death, was sufficient for people to begin to visit his grave and the well associated with him in some numbers. And they begin to treat him as a saint. But with the exception of the rather mysterious business of the boot and the cure for the ague, we have no clear understanding of quite why that might be. But his cult has left behind an architectural legacy. The numbers visiting his grave in the early part of the 15th century seem to have been so significant that the parish of North Marston was able to rebuild its church's chancel, where Schorne was buried, on really a rather lavish scale. And as part of that rebuilding process, it was fitted up to make it more suitable for the cult of a saint. The north side of the chancel, a 2-storey sacristy or vestry was added. The upper storey, complete with a fireplace, was what you might call a watching loft. It had a little window that gave a view into the interior of the chancel, where an eye could be kept on pilgrims to Master John's grave beside the high altar, and also to the large cult image of him there, holding the devil in a boot, with its light burning beside it. Then in the 1470s, the whole story takes a really quite extraordinary twist. In the late 1470s, Richard Beauchamp, Bishop of Salisbury and Dean of Windsor, was tasked by King Edward IV with rebuilding St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle to serve as a new royal mausoleum and a chapel for the Order of the Garter. It was an expensive business, and it seems that Beauchamp was looking around for sources of potential revenue for this new foundation. And in 1478, he obtains permission from Pope Sixtus IV to exhume John Schorne's remains and remove them to St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. His relics were placed in a specially constructed chapel close to the high altar of St George's Chapel on the south side of the choir. The chapel is now the burial place of Henry Clinton, 1st Earl of Lincoln, and his tomb takes the place once occupied by Master John Schorne's shrine. Now, the shrine that Beauchamp created for John Schorne was expensive, and we know that £4.13 alone was expended on painting it. That's about £30,000 in modern money. Considerable expense and effort was taken to create a fine setting for the shrine within this chapel with a beautiful fan-vaulted ceiling. Clearly, the cult of John Schorne at North Marston was enough of a rip-roaring success that it merited the considerable investment of his relics translation to Windsor. We know that people continued to visit his tomb at Windsor and seemingly went there in good numbers, as numerous pewter pilgrims' badges have been found, many on the Thames foreshore in London. These badges, which would have been purchased by pilgrims at the shrine in Windsor, show Master John holding his boot or standing preaching in a pulpit. The latter are interesting, as it suggests perhaps that part of Master John's saintly charism was as a preacher. In the absence of his bones in North Marston, the image of the saint and the well become the new focus of devotion, and pilgrims continue to go there. Now, Master John's relics were not the only important relics kept at Windsor. They were part of, you might describe as a veritable pilgrimage theme park Bishop Beauchamp had installed there. Next to John Schorne's shrine at the head of the south choir aisle was a relic of the true cross, the cross of Christ, which was contained in an important reliquary that was called the Croes knife. Now, this reliquary had been found in 1282 on the body of Llywelyn the Great, the last independent Prince of Wales. It was given by King Edward III to Windsor in 1352, shortly after he had founded the Order of the Garter. And you can see images of Bishop Beauchamp and Edward IV kneeling before the Croes knife on the ceiling of the aisle adjoining Master John's chapel, where the cross was probably kept. In 1484, they were joined with the remains of the murdered king, King Henry VI, who was also becoming the focus of a saintly cult. And his remains were placed in this choir aisle too. And really interestingly, on the Gately Rood screen in Norfolk where Schorne appears, there is also just 2 slots along from him an image of King Henry VI. Clearly, whoever painted this screen or commissioned it associated Schorne and King Henry VI together. Perhaps they'd been on pilgrimage and venerated the relics of Schorne and the King in the south choir aisle at St George's Chapel, Windsor. The sort of popular springing up of devotion we see in the cult of John Schorne was how most saintly cults have developed in Christian history. People gain a reputation for holiness in life, miracles occur after death, and after veneration has occurred for a good while and miracles have been attested, a cult is either established or it fades away. There was no formal process of canonization in the Western Church until the middle of the 12th century. And it was part of the legalizing and centralizing policy of the papacy. The decision was made in that period to begin to refer all causes of potential saints to the Pope in Rome for ratification before they could be declared saints. Surprise, surprise, as the Middle Ages progressed, that process became increasingly time-consuming, complex, and, above all, costly. To put it rather bluntly, those who supported a saintly cause in the later Middle Ages had to be absolutely certain that their speculation was worthwhile. Consequently, very few holy people in the period after 1300 were formally canonized in the West. John Schorne's cult was one where the popular acclamation didn't reach the point where it was worthwhile to take the risk of having his saintliness rubber-stamped by Rome's newfangled legal process of canonization. It is possible that the cause of John Schorne simply ran out of time. Only 50 years after Master John's relics were translated to Windsor, the religious tide changed again. First phase of the English Reformation in the late 1530s came a full frontal assault on saints and relics. Saints' cults were suppressed, and relics, including Master John's, were destroyed. Who knows? Had things been different and had the canons of Windsor had more time, Master John Schorne might have been formally canonised, and we also might now have a written hagiography of him. But instead, he remains an enigmatic and rather shadowy figure.
If you enjoy this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.